And with many voters setting their sights on November's election, one citizen has gone back to the past to learn how to improve America's future. A.J. Jacobs is the New York Times bestselling author of the book, The Year of Living Biblically, in which he lived out an entire year adhering to the laws of the Bible. Now Jacobs has undertaken a more modern, and you could even say patriotic task with his new book, The Year of Living Constitutionally, one man's humble quest to follow the Constitution's original meaning. This time, for an entire year, Jacobs dressed, wrote, drank, and even battled like a citizen of colonial times. AJ joins us now with something of a costume and a beverage appropriate from the times. AJ, so good to see you this morning.
Good morrow, John.
I actually was just at the earlier this week with our fourth grader on his class field trip to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, a great museum. People should visit it. And they certainly make the point about how it's such a pertinent living document. Well, you did just that.
Exactly. I kept reading in the news that the Supreme Court believes that we should follow the original meaning of the Constitution from 1789. So that's the conservative majority. And I said, let me take them at their word and actually try to be the ultimate originalist and live like they did back then. So I carried a musket on the streets of New York. I gave up social media and wrote with a quill pen. I quartered soldiers. And the idea was to have this, hopefully a crash course, an entertaining crash course in the Constitution, but also to show that the Constitution needs to evolve. It can't be frozen in time.
So let's dig into this a little more. AJ, in the beginning of the book, you explain how and why you will live constitutionally, writing in part this: I will exercise my First Amendment right to free speech, but I'll do it in the old-fashioned way, by scratching out pamphlets with a quill pen and handing them out on the street. My right to assemble? I will assemble at coffee houses and taverns, not over Zoom or Discord. If I'm to be punished, I will insist my punishment not be cruel and unusual, at least not cruel and unusual by 18th century standards. Thanks to the Third Amendment, I may choose to quarter soldiers in my apartment, but I will kick them out onto the street if they misbehave. My goal is to understand the Constitution and expressing my rights as they were interpreted back in the era of Washington and Madison. I want, as much as possible, to get inside the minds of the Founding Fathers, and by doing so, I want to figure out how we should live today.
Well, I'm glad you weren't quartering in the medieval sense. At first, I was like, but then I realized you meant, quarter in your apartment.
Yes.
So what was it like, your sleepover with these soldiers?
Well, first of all, it's very difficult to find a soldier to quarter nowadays. I went to Times Square and asked a bunch of sailors if they wanted to quarter. It was not, I was able to find one, a friend of a friend who was quartering, who would be willing to quarter. My wife didn't love having a guy in our house, but he was very nice. He was
How long did you quarter him for?
We quartered, my wife said 3 days. That's enough. So, but I felt that's the Third Amendment. The Third Amendment says you don't have to quarter soldiers, but if you consent to, that's also your right.
AJ, you said you want the Constitution to adapt. It's a living document. Okay, but we've only had, 27 amendments? 10 were the Bill of Rights, so 17 since the inception. What is it you'd like to see? Is it amendments? What is it you think the Constitution needs to do to gain traction?
Well, great question. We need more amendments, but it's impossible to get amendments through in this polarized community. The Founding Fathers would be appalled that it's so hard to get amendments through. So you need to amend the amendment process, but it's a catch-22. So the way that we have to evolve the meaning as society changes is by evolving the interpretation.
So, AJ, you wrote your whole book, per the era, of course, with a quill. Apart from the fact there must have been a lot of ink splots and deleting places and a whole new novel experience for you, what did it give you beyond the physicality of wielding a quill to write like that?
Well, what I learned in the book is that there are many parts of the 18th century we do not want to go back to. It was a racist, sexist, smelly, dangerous time. However, there are aspects of it that I found are worth revisiting. And one is writing with offline. I used a quill. I don't think you have to, but I loved just the way it sounded, the way it felt, and it changed the way I thought, because I was not distracted by the dings and chimes of the internet. I was able to think more deeply and subtly. And I shudder to think what would happen if the founding fathers had tried to write the Constitution on a Google Doc. I don't think we would have a country.
The book is titled The Year of Living Constitutionally, one man's humble quest to follow the Constitution's original meaning. It is available now. New York Times bestselling author A.J. Jacobs, thank you. We appreciate that.
Thank you. Good to be on Forenoon Joseph.
Still ahead.